Now to the devastating floods in East Africa, where at least 130 people have died in Somalia, Kenya and Ethiopia following heavy rains. Somalia has already declared a state of emergency after more than 500,000 people were displaced from their homes. The rainfall has been described by the United Nations as a once-in-a-century event and is predicted to continue until December. The region had barely recovered from the worst drought to hit the area in 4 decades. Well, for more on the floods in East Africa, let's speak with Arise Africa correspondent Mark Bichachi, who is monitoring developments from the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. Good to see you, Mark. What's the latest update regarding the situation on the ground with the rains in the Horn of Africa where you are? I understand the downfall deluged parts of Kenya where you are, as well as Ethiopia, Somalia, and even parts of Tanzania.
Yes, Charles, you're quite right. The eastern seaboard of Kenya, both Somalia, Tanzania, and parts of Ethiopia has seen a deluge that has been non-stop for the last 5 days at least, with intermittent rains before then. This has been a lot of rain. A lot of people have been displaced in the hundreds of thousands. Now, Charles, I must tell you that this has come after people both in the northern sides of Kenya, the southern parts of Ethiopia, and much of Somalia had been displaced, not because of flooding, but because of drought. But where they ran to is now flooded, where they've seen rains that are bigger than they've seen in a century. So what we are seeing in East Africa is unexpected deluge, unexpected amounts of rain that has displaced and killed dozens of people across both countries, and all the governments were not prepared for this kind of rain as we speak today.
And there is concern now, isn't there, Mark, about contaminated water causing a significant threat to public health, because floodwaters are going into the wells and into reservoirs, and this has dramatically increased the threat of infection.
Yes, it has. And I must also point out, Charles, that much of the sanitation in East Africa, and especially in the Horn of Africa, is not sewage-based. It is septic tank-based. It is based on people digging their own pit latrines. And as you can see in the pictures that you're showing, a lot of these places are in the deluge, meaning that a lot of the fecal matter and human waste is going into this particular floods. And also, you must remember that most of these places are not served with piped water. So yes, there is an increased risk of disease, an increased risk of cholera, but also the governments in the region are not ready to take care of these people. There are no rescue boats, there are no rescue vessels, there are no places in high ground where these people can rest. So there is a disease of death through the waters, but there's also a disease of death through contamination and other factors that are affecting the people who are facing this deluge.
Well, I was going to ask you just a minute ago, what is being done to evacuate people to safer areas and to ensure that aid is reaching those who are most in need? I mean, is there a good emergency response system in place across the region? But I guess you've sort of answered that question, although you could amplify it a bit.
Let me put it in perspective. The southern part, southeastern part, and the northeastern part of Kenya, so southeastern part of Ethiopia and northeastern part of Kenya and Somalia are occupied by what we are calling marginalized communities. It is always also an arid region for both countries, and it is also regions which have been neglected all the time since the shifter wars in the 70s. So what is happening here, Charles, is this deluge is happening in places that have historical neglect and also have historically poor infrastructure. And the governments of both Ethiopia, Somalia, and Kenya were not prepared for such an eventuality. So the kind of aid that is being gotten there is not only slow, but the infrastructure there, Charles, is not ready to receive lots of help as quickly as possible, because it is both far away from Mogadishu, far away from Addis Ababa, and far away from Nairobi.
And as you mentioned there, Mark, rather worryingly, the situation is likely to get worse, with the rainfall predicted to continue until December. Mark, thank you very much indeed. Mark Bichachi is Arise Africa correspondent. He was talking to me there from the Kenyan capital, Nairobi.